to order for our regular meeting of Tuesday, June 5th, 2018. We'll start with a roll call. Robert, call a roll, please.
Malcolm Dudley.
Here.
Jack Ringham. Greg Conlon. Paul Jones.
Here.
Scott Lane. Narissa Dexter.
Here.
Jim Jans.
Here.
Alex Kay.
Here.
Anthony Wynn.
Here.
John Malbuch.
Here.
And Mayor Kerry Wiest.
We have a quorum, so we can proceed. The next item is public comment. Welcome. Would you tell us who you are?
Oh, my name is Ophelia. I live in Milwaukee's Avenue. I just want to attend and listen.
You're
It's
welcome to
okay.
listen. If you have any comments, we'd be happy to hear them now.
Thank you.
Ken, do you have anything to say?
I'm just here to learn. I've been gone for 2 months, so I thought I'd listen in.
Here's Jack. All right, the next item is the approval of minutes for our April meeting. Are there any
Come on in, Jack.
additions or corrections to those minutes? No comment, we'll accept a motion to accept the minutes.
I make a motion to accept the minutes.
Have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are carried. Now, I would like to request a small change in the agenda. Mike Brady is with us tonight, and he has to leave relatively early. And we have a telephone presentation that will start at 6:15. So Mike, would you be good enough to tell us what the legal situation is now and what the prospects look like for the future?
Yes, and the legal situation is our lawsuit to have 1889 declared unconstitutional. That's the statute that creates a loosey-goosey interpretation of Proposition 1A and allows the state to spend Proposition 1A money in violation, we contend, of Proposition 1A. In other words, it makes it much more flexible, how they interpret it and so forth, and we contend that Proposition 1A, having been passed by the voters, cannot be changed by an ordinary statute, which 1889 is. So there is a court hearing. The court hearing is October the 26th. At that time, the judge will rule as to whether 1889 is unconstitutional, which is our contention. Very difficult. We're prisoners of the court system. Very difficult it was impossible for us to get an earlier hearing. This is the earliest we could get. We're all ready to go. Our motion has been drafted, and we anticipate no difficulty in going ahead on October 26th. If what we're going to be filing is called a motion for judgment on the pleadings, so the judge will take our lawsuit and lay it alongside Proposition 1A, and he will determine, well, does this statute passed by the legislature on its face violate Proposition 1A? Should be sort of an open and shut case, and no evidence, no witnesses. It's one statute laid alongside the proposition passed by the people, and the judge makes a legal decision. Does the statute 1889 violate Proposition 1A? If we win the lawsuit, then it means that the state has to stop spending Proposition 1A money on any aspect of the high-speed rail project, including the peninsula, because they are spending Proposition 1A money here on the peninsula.
Is there anything in this that would require them to give the money back that they've already spent?
No. No.
So their strategy clearly is to spend their Proposition 1A money as quickly as they can.
Yes,
so they
I
don't
think
have-
that's fair. It's been off, thankfully, the spending has been relatively slow, but you're right. That's always the strategy, is keep building, keep spending as much as you can. And our strategy is to try to bring it to a conclusion as quickly as we can, so.
If they appeal, will they still be able to spend money, or if the judge rules against them?
If the judge rules against them and they were to appeal, I don't think they would be able to spend money. So that's the way an injunction would work. It
Okay.
would stop them. They can take the appeal. If it takes 2 years and they win the appeal, they could resume spending money.
Yeah.
If they, but they can't spend the money while the appeal is going on. That'd make it way too easy to get around a stop order.
Mike, would this stop them from doing the work that they're doing in the Central Valley as well?
Yes, yes.
Hmm.
Because they're spending money in the Central Valley pursuant to 1889 as well. And that's illegal. The Central Valley it's also interesting, and a lot of people don't realize this. There's only a small portion of the high-speed rail project that is actually actively under construction, if you exclude the peninsula. And that's an area from Madera to just outside Bakersfield. The project's, yeah, the project stops in an orchard outside Bakersfield, doesn't even go into Bakersfield because they don't have enough money. Now, I know that 1.5 years ago they said we've got enough money to build that part of the project. It's about a little over 100 miles. But what people don't realize is the most important part of the project is the part from the Central Valley to San Jose. See, that connects up the Silicon Valley. That goes through the Pacheco Pass. And in the last couple of years, it's been revealed that the Pacheco Pass is going to be extremely difficult. Lots of tunnels, many more tunnels than they thought. Cost would be like $29 billion. No way does anybody have the money for that. Cap and Trade couldn't do it. They don't have the money. The federal government is not interested. That's going to be a huge obstacle in this grand desire to connect up the Silicon Valley with the Central Valley and bring thousands of workers into the Silicon Valley. $29 billion and growing. Plus, I don't know whether you've been reading about it, the Transbay Terminal has turned into one of the biggest construction disasters in the United States. It's unbelievable. The cost of it has to be redone. They're being sued by the Millennium Tower, blamed for the tilting of the Millennium Tower because of the way they built the Transbay Terminal, but it's just a huge mess. So they've got their problems. Any questions?
Mike, do we know, has Caltrain spent any of the 1A money on electrification so far, or have they been using their own money?
Caltrain and High-Speed Rail entered into an agreement whereby High-Speed Rail would give Caltrain more than $700 million. As far as whether that money has actually been granted or given and is being spent, I don't know the answer. The contract to give it, though, I think that was signed several months ago.
Right.
But whether it's actually being spent, I don't know. I suspect it is, but I can't, I don't know.
I would suspect that they would be spending that money right away
Yeah.
when they had it. Because they're certainly aware of the lawsuit. But I don't know either, and there would be little value in asking the JPB on Thursday how much they've spent. Other questions from Mike? All right, the next item.
Can I ask one quick, short of the lawsuit, is there anything else that can stop high-speed rail?
Well, we've
Not enough money?
we've speculated.
Find it.
We've speculated for years as to what will happen when Governor Brown leaves office, which was just a few months. The speculation has been that this high-speed rail was his legacy, and without him in Sacramento, would the steam go out of any enthusiasm that currently exists behind high-speed rail? Or would the Democrats who are in power set other priorities and try to find a way, and there are very simple ways that they could use the money remaining in the high-speed rail bond fund for other purposes. All they have to do is pass a one-sentence initiative and let the people vote on it, saying that the money left in the high-speed rail bond fund could be spent, for example, on education or water projects. That's all they would have to do. And one would think that high-speed rail is not a high priority among Democrats who have pet projects that they would like to spend money on. Those two I mentioned are two favorites. So that's a possibility.
But is there?
That's a political.
Is there a plan B, backup plan, if the court rules against us to do something else or not?
Well, we would take an appeal.
There's other lawsuits going on too.
Yeah, they're environmental lawsuits.
Yeah, there's no EIR even right now.
Yeah.
We will be delving, Ken, into a potential issue next on the agenda.
But there was talk a while ago of something being another proposition being brought up to defund the high-speed rail. And that's not being talked about anymore?
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah, I don't think anything is set for November to have.
Well, that's November.
Yeah.
Sometimes you lawyerly folks have a notion of how a particular judge tends to view things. Do you have any intuition about where this guy
Not
may
really.
come down?
I don't know much about this judge. So far, the rulings that he's made don't tip us off about how he would rule on the matter that's going to be before him, just the single matter. So I couldn't make any predictions.
All right, let's proceed. The next item on the agenda is a discussion with Susan McApple.
McAdams.
McAdams, I got the wrong. You have all been sent the material she sent to me. She has written a letter to the chief executive of the high-speed rail asking for a stop work order on all the work between Merced and Fresno because of safety problems. And she's identified several areas where there are serious safety problems that she thinks are sufficient cause to stop work on the project there. So we have asked her to join us by telephone tonight. And we can ask her questions and hear what she has to say. I hope that you read that material because it's a very interesting opportunity. If they've misdesigned this section of the railroad, they've got a lot of extra work that they have to do. And this is another avenue that might lead to difficulties in their completing their work.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and dial.
Yeah, go ahead and dial if you would, Robert.
Jim, do you have any more of those? Do you have any more of those?
I can't find them.
This is McAdams here.
This is Paul Jones, Susan. Welcome to our regular Atherton Rail Committee meeting. I have distributed among all the members the material that you sent me concerning the safety problem in the Merced to Fresno area. And we would like to discuss that, beginning by asking you if you have some information you would like to give us to supplement what we've already received.
You haven't seen it?
Paul, we didn't distribute that.
Oh, you didn't?
No, I didn't, it wasn't attached to the agenda.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
well, okay.
So has everyone seen the reports now?
Well, not as many as I thought, but some of us has. Let's proceed anyway.
Okay, so basically the trains are going to fall off the tracks. And I didn't put that, I tried to couch that politically in my documents, but as a track alignment specialist, there's something seriously wrong with all the curves between Fresno and Merced, including the complex known as the Y, which is closer to Merced. But I only focused on that one curve, and I intended to do more if it was necessary. But I would think that if they look at that one curve, which is so egregious because it's on top of this massive superstructure, and that it was improperly designed, and my sense is that the guys doing the design work were actually out-of-work Caltrans engineers who used a computer program and then never looked at the results in a rail technology fashion, because it so violates their own criteria. And so as you go through the process of looking at that one curve, which is near Herndon Drive, and for which you have the report, apologies, the scanned copies that I sent via the internet are not as clear as they could be, but in order to get all the documents onto one email, I used a less dense scan.
Yeah.
But in the next curve, which leaves Fresno County, once the train crosses the the San Joaquin River and enters Madera County, the next set of curves is even worse. And I didn't do the discussion of that yet, but I had told Mr. Jones, I believe, that I had worked for a rancher in Madera County who was suing High Speed Rail, and that was over the last 6 months. He sued. I didn't have to give the deposition, and he settled. And he settled for $36 million, and he's already received his check. Because some of the things that I pointed out in the report that you have in front of you, I had discovered when I was looking at his property, which is between Avenue 10 and Avenue 12, and also between the UP and the BNSF tracks.
Were you working with the large-scale design maps that the authority produces in making your analysis?
I started with, because I was the high-speed rail planning manager at Metro, I knew that in 2010, while I was still in that position, there was something very wrong with the alignment, and I thought, somebody will catch them. This is so crazy. But then I didn't look at it again until 2018. Nevertheless, because of that prior experience, I knew the mistakes were hidden in the draft environmental report. And I scanned over 30,000 pages of documents in order to define what it is, what went wrong. And basically, the High-Speed Rail Authority decided to veer away from the UP corridor back in 2010, even before the draft EIR came out. So when the draft EIR came out, even though they gave the public, they only gave the public 2 weeks to review the documents during harvest season at night, and supposedly the documents were available at several libraries, Chowchilla, Fresno, there's a whole list in the draft EIR, but yet those libraries did not receive the documents. Only the Madera County Library received the documents because there was a city planner who was concerned about it. In other words, there wasn't enough time for anyone to really look at the documents and all the alternatives in a coherent manner before making a decision. When the decision was made to do the alignment that they chose, only about 80 people commented on that alignment, and maybe not even that many. I could be mixing up my numbers, and I don't have that other document here, but that only 2 people were in favor of that alignment, and yet they chose that one anyway. And they just kept moving forward with this crazy to and fro, zigzagging, sashaying, whatever word you want to use, alignment that careens from the UP corridor across open farmland to the BNSF, and then careens back again. And then there's so many curves that, okay, first of all, when you have meetings at the preliminary level of engineering and all the seats are taken with the different departments, systems, maintenance, operation, alignment, structural, electrical, mechanical, the group that always wins the argument when there's something of this nature is maintenance and operation. Because if you can't maintain it and you can't operate over it, you might as well not even do it. Well, it appears that the maintenance and operation people did not weigh in on the particular alignment that they chose, and that is how the mistakes, in my opinion, avalanched.
That's very interesting. Let's talk a little more about the Herndon Drive problem. What is the vertical change in that turn, that compound turn of horizontal and vertical curves?
So what's the vertical change in grade?
Yes,
all right?
That's right.
That's figure 9, I believe, or attachment 9 in that report. And by the way, are we also speaking about the high voltage towers or only the alignment?
We're talking about the alignment now. Let's not.
Oh yeah, I got the, okay, so
let's not get into the high voltage towers just yet.
Okay, so I believe that's attachment 9, 7. The vertical curves 8 is the super elevation. Attachment 9. All right, so that is the final drawing, plan and profile of the curve under discussion. And when you look at the plan, which is at the top of attachment 9, it is the curve on the top of, see there's two lines diverging. The one that's going straight or at the bottom, that's the UP tracks. The one that's curving, that's the one that is the high-speed rail. So the change in vertical grade is a negative 0.22 coming into the curve and a 1.2% going downwards. So the change in vertical grade, I believe you would add those two numbers.
Okay.
But the problem is you can't super elevate. Right there at the crest of that vertical curve, as the curve goes up, the tracks begin to super elevate. The whole thing will twist to the side, and it's my belief that it will take off like a runway. Jet airliners typically take off at the airport between 150 and 200 miles an hour. This is going at 220. So even if they say, oh, we can go at 150, that train would, where I've put the arrow on the plan, on the profile, down below, I think that is exactly where it would derail.
At what speed would it be safe then on that particular curve?
I don't think it would be safe at any speed. Someone else asked me that, and I said, well, think about it. If it derails at 220 miles an hour, it's just going to keep going in a straight line until it hits the side of that San Joaquin River where it rises up very quickly. And so it's just going to keep going and then boom, accordion in and sink to the bottom of the river. I don't know. If it goes slower, it's going to go straight down. It's going to go off that bridge and not go off at a trajectory like an airplane. it's just going to go off that bridge and just go straight down. And that's even worse. You know, I mean, I don't know what the potential casualties would be with it going at 220 miles an hour, but I think that if the object went straight off of the top of that structure, that's at about 100 feet right there.
But the question
So-
is, at what speed might it be safe? This isn't going to happen if it's going 30 miles an hour, is it?
That I can't answer because it's never done. It's not allowed in AASHTO, which is the Bible of route alignment. It's not done in Caltrans. I've added those as attachments. And it's not done in their own criteria. It's just not done because you can't build it. When you take attachments 6, 7, and 8, as a track alignment engineer, we don't even know how to combine those formulas because there's no way to know where to stop, how to take a cross section every foot. I have no idea, and yet I've worked on a half a dozen major transportation projects around the country. I've never seen this before. This is not high speed. This is stupid.
All right, let's move over to another subject. Have you had any response from the authority to your stop work request?
Well, I handed the copies to the board secretary on their April meeting in Los Angeles, and afterwards I went up to speak to Mr. Kelly, who I've met before, and talked to him about it, and stressed the importance of issuing a stop work order, which I'm very familiar with from all the other transportation projects. This type of thing had come up, not necessarily an alignment thing, but an overlooked utility or an electrical problem or some structural thing had to be reconfigured. So when the contractor or the engineering group was issued a stop work order, no one lost their jobs. Everyone got paid until they solved the problem at whatever level or whatever division needed to take care of it. And then we got the new revisions, and then we went back to work. But so for me, using this type of request was just something that came out of my previous experience. But I wouldn't be surprised if Brian Kelly ignores it. But I do think that he has the good sense to at least look into it.
But you have no evidence that he has done that, is that correct?
No, sir.
What further actions do you have in mind for this problem? Do you have other avenues that you want to explore?
Well, like I said, if I have the time and I have the presence of mind, because this takes an incredible amount of focus, and this is all volunteer at this point, that I will begin to look at the next curve or at the Y, because I think the Y is even more egregious as far as mistakes. I do also have some history with the engineering group that's designing this, and this is not the first time I've gone up against them. This is actually the 5th time. And each time I have been proven correct. So I wouldn't have the confidence or the audacity to put something like this together if I hadn't already been through it over the last 7 years. And each time when I've been through these different events, the same engineers are involved.
That's the HNTB group?
PB.
PB, okay.
But that, when they talk to me, they all admit that they've had their arms twisted and that they've got to say what they've got to say or they'll lose their jobs. So I can't do more than this at the moment. I do have that other report, though, the high voltage tower, I think is even more damning than this one.
Would you tell us about that, please?
So wherever the high voltage towers cross the high-speed rail tracks, the high voltage towers need to be raised. In Los Angeles, near the LAX, the international airport, the green line has to go under a series of high voltage towers. I was the track manager for the green line for 5 years, and this particular problem of raising the high voltage towers never went away. It took 7 years from the beginning of the discussion till when it finally ended, and yet most of the engineering design and construction took less time than that. And what happens is that if you have to raise the high voltage tower, the lowest wire of the high voltage tower over the catenary, where there will be an interference between the signaling of the high-speed train, not unlike when you drove down the highway and you lost contact on your radio. So in order to evaluate what the lowest wire would be, you need to change the General Order 95. Are you familiar with General Order 95 at all?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so General Order 95 is like a 500-page Bible from the California Public Utility Commission, CPUC, that governs the rules around such problems as this one. The CPUC was fully aware of the fact that that distance between the top of the catenary of the high-speed train and the bottom wire of the high voltage tower, that distance was only defined from 1920s when trolley cars ran under the wires, so that they needed to reevaluate that distance and determine what it would be. They held hearings starting in 2013 or something, 2014. They ended badly. Most of the collected agencies wanted the investigation to continue, and the judge ruled against them. And High Speed Rail, I have that in that report. High Speed Rail representative response to the collective energy agencies was literally, I don't have to answer to you. And no further response was provided. I provide the attachment and the page from the legal hearings where that statement was recorded. So that you have this issue with the high voltage towers. Now, the high voltage towers crisscross the state of California in many locations between Atherton and Fresno. Well, no one has made a move to do anything about the high voltage towers. In fact, this one example that I use, the high-speed train goes right through the middle of it in Fairmead, and Fairmead is located out between Madera and Merced near Chowchilla. It's a very small farming community, but back there in the avocado orchards, there's a high-voltage tower, and the high-speed train is going right through the middle of it. And it's not on the draft EIR, this high-voltage line. It's not in the final EIR. It's not anywhere in the documents. And it takes, like I said, 7 years from start to finish to raise these towers. Because you can't just raise the bottom line. You have to raise all of them equally, and you have to take into account the temperature, the wind. They need exact calculations, and because the wires need to be lengthened and raised, you also have to raise the other two towers and relocate them as well. The wires also have to cross the high-speed train at right angles, and that's another code governed by the CPUC in order to diminish the effect. Now, what the authority states is that they're going to bury all the utilities. Yet, burying the high-voltage wires under the high-speed rail will cost 10 times as much minimum, if not 30 times as much. A vault has to be built under the tracks. The vault must be air-conditioned and must have increased flood control around it. The vault itself will need an entire environmental study, and yet nothing's been done or said about these high voltage towers. They've been completely omitted from any intelligent discussion in the draft EIR, the final EIR, and the business plan.
Can the CPUC stop high-speed rail by insisting that they follow the rules?
No, it's from my prior experiences with the other alignment problems I had down here that they're in cahoots with them. Because who does California Public Utilities Commission report to? Who's the top dog? The governor.
The governor. I
Who's in
presume.
charge of high-speed rail? The governor.
Yeah,
And who's in
okay.
charge of Caltrans? The governor.
Okay.
So I'd have no way of getting, all I can do is produce these technical reports and hope they make it through the channels like yours. Thank you very much for having me speak to you today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for your information. It's been most interesting, and we will certainly include this in our discussions and decide what we want to do about this and other issues.
Right, because I read all your meeting minutes and your other things about your committee, and I had no idea you guys were even up there. So we're sort of on our own down here, but we've been fighting them tooth and nail for a long time.
We've been a burr under their saddle for a long time.
Paul?
Yeah.
And Susan, this is Mike Brady speaking.
Hi.
I'm one of the attorneys involved in the 10-year lawsuit against high-speed rail, but I have a couple of ideas for how this information might come in very useful. First of all, we have been funneling information to the state auditor, which is doing an audit of the high-speed rail project.
Mm-hmm.
A report like this, I think, would be received by the state auditor. We'll see. They deliberately, the legislature has put limits around what they're doing. So, but it's worth a try. More importantly, within the last 3 months, the federal government has authorized a full and comprehensive audit of the high-speed rail project in California. The Secretary of Transportation, Elaine Chao, says that her primary objective in regulating railroads is safety. So this whole thing revolves around safety.
That's right.
Something like this should be, we have the names, there's a brigadier general who's in charge of this audit by the federal government. We have his name, and I would like to put this report into a form where we can send it to the federal government and launch them on this with their 50 inspectors and experts and descend on the High-Speed Rail Authority and give them hell.
That'd be great. Thank you. But who is the Brigadier General, can I ask?
I can't remember his name, but
I hope it's not the same one that used to run the CPUC.
I don't know.
Well, if it is, then you're not going to get anywhere.
I don't
Because
know.
this problem, I've been discussing that high voltage tower problem with the CPUC since 2011. I wrote a report that some of this recent report is taken from to Congressman Jeff Denham, who was trying to get an audit back in 2014. So that's why I was the second report is much easier for me to put together because I have so much history with it. And the fact that I realized because I've worked within the system for so long, it's a very complicated topic. But I think that I've learned how to explain it easy enough that not enough things have been looked at. And none of this is in their environmental reports. Well, what do you mean the train goes right through a high voltage tower and you're not even going to move it or deal with the property owner about it? That's really, really something. And that's not the only location. There's dozens of locations throughout Central California where that occurs. Each time it happens, it's probably going to cost them like $500 million. There's billions of dollars missing from the estimate.
Well, Paul, this is something that I can work on with Paul, the chairman, and with you. Get reports, start sending them to the people who should be looking at them,
Good.
And we'll do this very quickly. I'm available most of the summer to work on something like this.
Oh, good. And I think that all your other reports and your meeting minutes, I read over all those as well, are very, very good. And they really stand out. So thank you for that effort.
Well, thank you very much, Susan, for your information. We would like to keep in touch with you as the things move forward and see what we can do together.
Great.
Paul, I've got to leave, but I'll work with you, and we'll get something moving on this.
Susan, this is Jim Jans. I'm vice chair of the committee. Have you talked to any reporters on this? Like
Oh yeah, I had when I was down here. One of my first major issues. I worked with Dan Weichel from the LA Times for there was a light rail intersection in Los Angeles, busiest light rail intersection in the United States, and it was so poorly designed that it was going to cause a derailment. And so I actually lost my position at Metro because I complained about it. And at the time, I was the highest ranking track expert at Metro, 9,000 employees, and yet they confiscated all my documents and put me out on the street with 3 bus tokens. So someone from the CPUC alerted the LA Times, and they started working with me, and that resulted in 20 articles. And so then for a long period of time, I worked with that reporter. That was Dan Weichel, who's more technically astute than Ralph Vartabedian. Ralph has more of an overview, which is also equally important in this argument. But Dan was capable of going to both sides and getting the discussion going on both sides, and the public could easily see what was wrong with this picture. They eventually had to fix the track work, and they're going to have to do it again. So, and it's the same engineer that made the decision to go ahead with that was the head of construction at Metro, and then became the head of engineering for the high-speed rail for PB in Sacramento. It's the same, it's like, well, I hope you get somewhere, but they're not. In the olden days, it's like the CPUC were like, you had to do whatever they told you to do. It was public safety, but they're not doing their jobs. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Susan.
Okay, so yeah, I have talked to reporters, and Ralph Vartabedian already has them. And I haven't talked to Ralph for a while. I know not to bother him because he always comes up with something, but I have spoken to him, and Dan Weichel retired. But I still talk to Dan, and he talks to Ralph, so.
All right, good.
Any?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I think she was done.
I think
There was a big pause, and
That's okay.
Thank you.
I think we're through. I don't think that
Can't
we're
count
going to get
breathing.
any more information tonight.
Who is
Well-
she? Who is she?
She's who she said she is. She's a track alignment specialist that has worked in Southern California for many years and has been checking out the high-speed rail and discovering things that disturb her a great deal. And she wrote this stop work request to Brian Kelly. And
And she found you guys?
no, we got, Kathy, were you the one that first found her?
Yeah, I've worked with Susan before. I've talked to her many times, and I know that somebody sent around her, I think it was the group in Central Valley, sent around her original report, and then, we thought that I think you guys should look at it. Remember?
Yeah, you got it to CCHSR.
Yeah.
I sent it to Paul.
Yes.
Right, because I wanted to make sure that it was credible. And that's why we had you checking to see if it was credible.
Yeah.
So, we'll see. They are going to respond. The high-speed rail is going to respond. I do know that. I have somebody that I'm talking to, and I know for a fact, because I saw a blind copied letter that said, you are to look at these, and this is somebody with authority. So I do know, and I'm gonna do public records requests and find, and I think I can get the answer anyway if I was blind copied on the original request. So she's also on the board of TRAC, which is the Training Writers Association, and I asked David Schoenbrunn, who runs Transdev, if she was credible. You know, she's not a PE, you know, an engineer in that respect, but she has given classes to the people that design these systems, and there's one particular person who's problematic. And anyway, David Schoenbrunn said she's the real deal. She's one of the few experts on trackage. So I believe that she's, so you say how to stop the train? If you see things like this, and if the high-powered electrical lines are that much of a problem, there's so many problems that they have to be stopped other than flat running out of money, which they may do too.
Paul, did you get a chance to look at it and form an opinion on the
Yes,
credibility
I
of the
did, and
report?
It looked credible to me. This is why I contacted her and asked her to talk with us here. For those of you who don't know Kathy Hamilton, she's been active on the high-speed rail circuit since its inception, and is a reporter and has reported excellent articles about all sorts of interesting things.
Are you going to circulate the
We'll
the
circulate.
report?
No, we'll-
Apparently, it was supposed to be in this
Yeah.
package and it didn't end up there, so
Yeah, well,
haven't seen it. And
I
that
apologize, I didn't have that in.
that was a misfit, and we will certainly circulate it.
I mean, the fact that you saw it and think it's credible is interesting to me. You know, basically I have no opinion. I probably should stop talking because I haven't read it and all I've done is listen.
Yeah.
But I've had 40-year career listening to people present technical arguments, and I was frankly underwhelmed by this one.
Yeah. Well,
Now, maybe that's just that she isn't a very good presenter, but I mean, she didn't answer the easiest, straightforward questions.
She was
She used all
dancing around.
sorts of sachet
Yeah.
words.
That's right.
I was underwhelmed,
Okay.
and I'd be careful with the information.
I think that's a very valuable opinion. I thank you, Tom. I was a little disappointed in her presentation as well. She didn't focus very well.
I'd like to read it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to do anything about this until we have circulated the report and you've all had an opportunity to read it. So I'd like to postpone any further discussion of this item until our next meeting, and then we will see if we can decide whether we want to do anything and what we want to do.
May I ask the question?
Sure.
Do you know anyone who is an expert in this field that could also review it in addition to yourself?
Not just offhand, no, I don't. No. The people that I knew that did this kind of work are mostly dead because it was quite a few years ago.
I did have somebody review it who's very knowledgeable. He's not a high-speed rail engineer, but he's been with trains for 40 years, and he works with the high-speed rail, and he looked at it and he was concerned. So,
I think the problem is real.
That's what I'm, yes.
Whether, well, we don't know Susan very well. A telephone participation's not the best way to meet people.
And she may not have had a sense of the audience and.
Well, she had no reason to. I just said this is the Athens rail.
Yeah.
And that could be anyway. It could be a
Most of us.
Election day, I
Well,
agree.
our politician is out watching the ballots.
I do think we have had a history of finding technically explosive problems from people from the outside,
Yeah,
because there is, as she says, a tendency to move people around. It's a very insular organization, a set of organizations. It doesn't get a lot of fresh viewpoints or critical viewpoints, and we have discovered quite a few things on our own
well,
that have turned out to be the number one risk factor for electrification is something we discovered right here a year ago
that's right.
from someone who has zero background in train engineering.
Well, and checked it out
But-
with the consultant that we hired
That's
from
right.
banks. Okay, the next item on our agenda is a PCEP update. We've got our beloved mayor.
no,
Liz-
No, we had the revised.
Oh, no, that's
resolution.
April 3rd. I got the wrong. Sorry about that. Yeah, recent PCP activity.
No, 5A.
5A.
Oh,
5A.
5A, okay. The revised resolution governing town's committee movement. Robert, do you want to present that?
Sure. At the town's last council meeting, the city council adopted a new resolution regarding the establishment and operation of the various committees and committees in the town, and basically sets forward some guidelines and principles for the rules of participation, including how members are selected, the organizational items such as the preparation of minutes and meetings and how we notice those things, as well as how they are appointing those committee members as well. And so that resolution is attached to your packet. Additionally, as part of that, there was a revision to the town rail policy, predominantly focusing on high-speed rail. And so there was previously a list of items regarding the electrification project that were decided to basically refocus the attention towards the high-speed rail. So that's attached to your packet as well. It's page 11 of 12 of the resolution governing the town committees. And so one of the other things is just a clarification regarding town priorities regarding the Caltrain line. Basically, with a desire to restore weekday service here in the town of Atherton, changing the designation of the station from a holdout to a normal station, and making sure that there is full mitigation of environmental impacts to the town, as well as looking at having the town continue the desire for the quiet zone through the town.
The quad gates at
Yeah.
Watkins. What I've read these carefully, and what Robert reports is exactly true. They cleaned out a lot of the information in our earlier set of rules that have passed by, and they've disappeared. They're no longer relevant. There are a lot of references to the PCC Peninsula. Well, I forget what it stood for. It was a committee of elected officials from 6 of the towns up and down the peninsula that met and talked about high-speed rail problems on a monthly basis. And we contributed to that. We attended it, but that committee has been defunct for some years, so there's no point in leaving that in our description. Also, they took out the wording that is most harsh against Caltrain. without changing what we're looking for, which Robert just recited, so that we're not, our purpose is not to oppose Caltrain. We would like to work with them if we can. If we can't work with them, we'll do the best we can under the circumstances. But it was a softening of that issue that perhaps we can dampen a little bit the animosity that we've generated with Caltrain over the last few years.
One additional slight modification.
Yes, sir.
One committee, the members were only 2-year appointed, so, which was the finance committee. We changed it to all committees, they're all 4-year appointments.
Well,
Not our committee.
Are we on 4-year terms?
We're-
We've always been on perpetuity.
Oh, you guys aren't on terms, you guys have life sentence.
Exactly.
I wanted you to
I
put it
forgot
quite
you're
that
the
way, but
exclusion
you got
of the
the
rule.
right term.
You guys, so.
Actually, I had a question in that area. I remember a couple of years ago, we voted on the merits of changing the sort of type of committee. I don't remember, I have to speak in layman's terms.
Yeah.
But I think the background was that there were some concerns about how well we were self-policing ourselves on Brown Act enforcement.
Yeah.
And so we debated the merits of changing the rail committee's type, such that I guess the Brown Act is not quite as relevant. So my question is every committee having the same sort of template on like Brown Act enforcement and so on?
And that's why you've seen structural rechanges, why your council members' levels of activity are different than, as our participation levels are a little different than they used to be, and staff's participation in the monitoring and the guidance through the chair.
Okay.
So,
A major reason for declining to change was that we would drop into a sort of an advisory committee status, and our communication with the council would be greatly reduced. And we felt that we wanted to remain an official committee that was part of the council activity and continue to have their ear, which we have. They've been very supportive of things we've taken to them.
Is there any action on this, or are we just?
No.
Just
Are you
accept-
Just informational.
Are we open for comments?
It's been adopted.
It's been done by the
Well, I
council.
see that, but there's a couple errors in here, I think.
Oh, please raise them.
All right, first of all, the description of the rail committee says there were 10 appointed members and 1 city council member liaison, but the agenda says that there are 2 council member liaisons, which is
one's an alternate, but you're right, technically, I guess, in technical terms, it actually 2. If I wasn't here, Mike would be here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe they should say in 1 alternate or something. I don't know how you handle that. In the rail policies, which I applaud the toning down of any harsh anti-Caltrain language. I think that's a good idea, and I like the way it's written. But I think there's a couple things wrong with here. Malcolm, tell me, there's a statement in here in section B that says Atherton is the only city in the Caltrain line that receives no weekday train service. Isn't it the only city with a station that receives no service during? Aren't there other cities that have?
Burlingame, but they have a second
Burlingame
station.
has
They have 2
stations.
stops, yeah.
They have 2
No.
stations, so they get service.
Yeah.
But
Is it San
Broadway
Bruno?
does not.
Broadway does not get
Yeah.
weekly
Is
Yeah,
there any
but-
city that's on the line that doesn't have a station though?
No.
San Bruno?
No, they have a
San Bruno has
station.
station.
They have
And
a
they
news
have,
station.
they have daily service.
South City is being,
Right.
Yeah, Daily
Largely
City.
Brisbane.
has one.
Brisbane.
I was gonna say Brisbane, maybe.
Brisbane,
They have the Bay Shore station.
they've got the
Yeah.
Bay Shore station,
Okay.
which is not technically in Brisbane, but it's accessible.
Well, I'm not sure that statement's absolutely correct. I recall we used to say it was the only city with a station that received on the line, that received no service. So you might wanna check that out, Robert. And the other comment was that in the second paragraph, under paragraph B, it says in years past, Caltrain provided the Atherton station with weekday and weekend rail service until it declared the first quote fiscal emergency, citing the need to reduce costs, including station stops. That was in 2004, and I don't recall that's exactly what happened. My recollection was they implemented the baby bullet, decided they need to revise their schedules to accommodate the baby bullet, eliminated a lot of stations, a lot of local stops throughout Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. And the fiscal emergency doesn't, they technically should have provided a environmental impact report done, or been subject to CEQA review in order to reduce public train service. But there's an exception for a fiscal emergency, but they never did either. Now, we didn't challenge it because we figured, if we challenged it, all they'd have to do was to declare fiscal emergency and then it would be over with, so why bother? But I don't think in later years, they may have declared a fiscal emergency officially, but when they first did it, they did not do so. So the real reason, I think, I'm not sure what the real reasons were for cutting out after 2004, but fiscal emergency was not the top reason given.
Realistically, it was two people that
Yes.
had in their mind, the idea was everything was focused on speed.
Yeah.
And the idea was they wanted to get from San Francisco or San Jose to San Francisco in under an hour, and I think they do it in 59 minutes. You're right, they cut out 20% of local service.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they emasculated the intra-peninsula service
Right.
by cutting all those stops out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason they did this quote bullet thing was because Jackie Spear had gone for money to Howard Good was the one who's leading this stuff, and she was going to help to have money for things like parking and other really essential things. But 2/3 of the votes in the legislature was, in the South, and there was no interest in parking up here in California. And so she came back to Howard and says, "Well, I'm going to try to go back again, but let's make something sexy here. Let's call it a bullet train." That didn't change because we already had the express trains. I mean, it was just
Right.
a title to get it passed, and that it worked. I mean, they got the votes in Southern California for a bullet train, like Japan and others. And it was really two people, and there were steps, as you well know, we're involved, where they cut out our service before that. The key service we had was the morning service, and a lot of the students from Castellet and all would come here in shuttles home. It was,
That's right.
they cut out the key one. Mike Scanlon was supportive, but he backed down to the two people who were really making the decisions. And we complained when they cut out our key, if ridership was an issue and they cut out our key times for the stops, that was going to work against us.
Yeah.
And he said, well, let's not complain about it. He said, that's the primary, he lived in Selby. And his main station was here at Atherton. But he says, don't complain about the service reducing that, because they're out to kill your service altogether, these people. I mean, that's what he said. I mean, he
Right.
said, this is my station. And that's what happened. I mean, they're not going to say that. And then, of course, Art Lloyd was a help to us in terms of scheduling and all when we were dealing. He was on the JPB at the time. And, but a lot of personal things that were not issues. You're right. It wasn't a fiscal issue. They've always
Right.
had, fiscal issues because they haven't had a permanent funding source. So,
But you're right. They reduced service initially,
yeah,
and then that, of course, reduced the ridership. And then they said, "Oh, well, your ridership is so small, we're just going to cut it out."
yeah.
I have one other technical point that I'd like to make that may or may not be incorrect depending on what is meant here, but I would like to make an accurate statement. Terry's familiar with this, Paul is familiar with it, and Rick Bergoli would be familiar with it. And that is, it is an absolute fact of the federal regulation that a quiet zone, is the word used in here, perfecting the quiet zone, that a quiet zone cannot include a station, a train station. There is no provision in the federal regulation for including the number the federal number that would indicate a station. You can only include within the establishment of a quiet zone FRA numbers that relate to public highway rail grade crossings. And if there are any private rail grade crossings, private road rail grade crossings, you can include those, or they have to be included. You don't have a choice, they have to be included. But you cannot, the Atherton station or any of the stations can never be included within a quiet zone. That is part of the federal regulation. So whatever, I would applaud that this station be upgraded for safety. You know, that is a Caltrain mission that should be front and center, but it has nothing to do with the quiet zone or perfecting the quiet zone. It's technically impossible. There is no provision for that.
So
It wasn't a mistake
So
that was
there
made.
should be, if we were to do another quiet zone, it'd be a separate one at Watkins and then one
It would be added on.
would be added on.
It would be added on.
So can I just ask a question?
Sure.
Is the technicality that you're suggesting the separation of the two, meaning that
It's just the word.
rather than perfecting the quiet zone, just providing one at
It
Watkins?
says perfecting the quiet zone. It would just, perfecting is not a word that is ever
Yeah.
used in the federal regulation. I wouldn't even know what that meant.
Okay.
That's a judgment.
Yeah.
So,
term.
To
So the
extend
The point
the
is
So-
to
so-
add,
Yeah, so
to
it's
add
nothing to do with
on
this.
to create and add on the quiet zone at Watkins.
okay.
Watkins is a separate public highway rail grade crossing.
You're talking about,
So this is just using the word in here, Scott. It's just I'm looking at the wording. I'm saying it says here, seeks to perfect the quiet zone within the town through the addition of quad gates at Watkins Avenue
I
crossing
gotcha, okay.
and upgrading the Atherton station. And the other point is simply upgrading quadrant gates at Watkins does not give you a quiet zone.
Well,
It is a prerequisite, and then you would have to establish a quiet zone.
But the quiet zone is established by the town, not by Caltrain.
That's correct. This has nothing to do with Caltrain. So the safety issue, which should be addressed by Caltrain with their holdout station, that's Caltrain's responsibility, and the town cannot get involved in that. Nor does it impact the quiet zone.
although there are, so there's, to add a little more information, I know that Caltrain as of a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, before they made a recent change, they would always, the bullet trains would always blow their horns going through a station that it wasn't intending to stop at. And I know, and I experienced that firsthand back when I was working at YouTube. I take the San Bruno, and sure enough, the trains are blasting their horn through a raised structure. So even grade separation did not save you from them blowing the horns at the, but they changed their policy about a year ago, and now they don't blow the horn through stations that they're not stopping at. So at least for this station, if it's upgraded, they shouldn't need to blow the horn going through the Atherton station. And by upgrading, we're not talking about raising it, we're just talking about boarding it. You don't have to cross another
The
track.
holdout station.
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
the holdout
And I think everyone here knows what a holdout station is, but for anyone who doesn't, what it means is that there are a few stations on the Caltrain right-of-way where in order to board northbound, you have to cross the southbound tracks. This is very, very dangerous if a train is coming, the southbound train is coming through at the same time someone's trying to board the northbound train. So what Caltrain does is, in the situations where someone's stopped at a station, as a holdout station, trains going in another direction have to stop on the tracks, wait for people to get on the train, and then that train goes and then the other train goes. But I think they have to also, because the Atherton station, also because you're crossing the tracks, I think it's considered a private. It's not a highway. It's not a highway.
It's within the station.
Right.
This is the issue. We've researched this 69,000 ways to center. Karen knows. The issue is that in any station, Caltrain has the right to set up a policy to provide sound notification should they want to. It would have to, but it has to be at all their stations. They cannot discriminate at certain types of stations.
Which makes sense.
So you're saying they've changed the policy and they're no longer sounding.
Unless there's a safety issue.
Sure, of
Obviously,
course,
if they
yes.
see someone on the
Well,
tracks or too close,
So
I mean,
the
they.
point that I was making only is that there was a misunderstanding by some people at one point in time, which went on for quite a while, thinking that you could add a station into the quiet zone. And that
Okay.
Atherton had made an error by not adding the station into the quiet zone.
I got you.
And that
Okay.
is technically impossible. You can never add a station into a quiet zone. That doesn't mean they're sounding at the station, but you cannot prevent the owner of that station, Caltrain, that platform, from providing bird tweets if they want, or lightning bolt sounds, you know. That's their station.
As long
They
as,
could
as long as
provide-
it's uniform.
As long as it's uniform up and down there, the 51 miles or whatever it is, would have to be uniform.
Uniform tweets.
Uniform. So I'm just saying, this is technically misleading here.
I got you. Okay.
Well, in my morning dog walking experience, most of them don't, but there are a couple of rogue trains
That's right.
in the early morning that blow every time.
They've been
As
going
they-
on since
Yeah.
they.
It's about,
Right.
it's about
Declared
20%
quiet
violation rate,
Yeah.
still, and it's been that way since it was
zone.
established.
That way uniformly.
I have a 2-year log. I've kept a 2-year log. Every train that goes by. And it's clearly a few engineers and, you know, and I can prove that. And who just do antagonistic behavior. It isn't even the station. It's at the Redwood City Atherton border. They hit that.
They just
They
start.
start.
Yeah.
They go all the way through. I mean, it's very sad. But it's a pattern, every day, day in, day out. I could give you the times.
Oh,
I
I
can tell you
can.
the pattern.
The
That's how it
northbound
occurs,
ones anyway.
you know. So,
Well, let me ask, Carrie, have these been adopted, or are they
These have been
available for us
adopted,
to modify?
But these don't look like egregious modifications, so I'm sure staff will.
Yeah, we can bring them forward through
Okay.
the city manager.
Yeah.
and if you would like to, if you
Are
would
there
like to
other
ask me any
comments
questions, I'd be
on
more
this
than happy
issue
to
now?
work with all of you to give you the supporting documentation again. Because it
Okay.
is very technical, but we've beaten it to death.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Next item is the CEP update.
Well, I have a little bit of information to provide on that, and then I'll move into the PG&E activity. So we have yet to receive a schedule from Caltrain on the construction activities plan for the town.
They haven't even dug any holes yet, have they?
They haven't done anything yet.
Okay.
So right now, the primary work areas that they have going on are in San Mateo and San Jose. I did see some of their folks out here the other day, and I spoke with them, and they were doing some preliminary planning for starting to do the potholing associated with the catenary system.
Mm-hmm.
Asking them to schedule, they don't know when that potholing is going to begin. And basically that is utility investigation, subterranean investigation to make sure that as they put in the catenary poles that they're not going to hit any underground utilities. So that's going to be one of their first things that they do, is that utility investigation. And so they haven't posted anything online or sent any other notification as to actual schedule for the town. So as we get that information, we'll be happy to share that.
I recall it's gonna be quite noisy when they do the potholing, or they're supposed to put like door hangers near for any houses nearby or something? I don't know. Maybe
There'll likely be some notification. Potholing isn't usually
too noisy, okay.
too noisy.
Okay.
You probably, right down the street from your house, we have Atherton Fiber doing some digging and potholing and stuff like that. It's I'm gonna say regular construction noise, it's not
Okay.
anything egregious.
Okay.
So, we had, regarding PG&E activity, we actually met with PG&E twice to find out information. One meeting, our first meeting, was with both PG&E and Caltrain to find out a little more about what was going on. And basically Caltrain, through their rights, has required the various utilities to relocate their wires or adjust their wires to allow for the electrification project. And they've given the utility companies a deadline. PG&E's deadline is near the end of October to make adjustments.
Okay.
They assume those rights from UP, and so their rights date way back. They own the right of way. They can require the users of that right of way that have permission to occupy space to move. And they gave them a deadline. PG&E is required to move by that deadline. Caltrain did say that due to some other things, there may be a little bit of flexibility, but they have not shared or given that flexibility yet to PG&E, but that if they do give them some, it won't be more than a couple months.
Okay.
It's going to be basically, they can't have anything impact their contractor's work schedule at the risk of liquidated damages. And so that's...
Are they going to inform the town and property owners of changes?
Okay, so that was item number one.
Okay.
As of that meeting, which was held in May, PG&E had not yet started their engineering to figure out what they needed to do and what they were planning.
Okay.
At that meeting, we started the discussion of, well, PG&E is going to be expending resources to design the system. What if the town were to adopt an underground utility district? Could they swap those resources, and instead of raising, can they go underground? The answer to that was, as much as they would love to save the money and use the Rule 28 credits that we have to do that, there are things like timeline that impact that. So the simple answer is that the timeline precludes that from happening.
Okay.
The resources that they have allocated, which are electrical designers that basically work on overhead stuff, is different than the resource that's used for undergrounding project, which is basically the folks that design underground infrastructure, which are more related to gas. So the resource allocation and the timeline really don't allow for it. That being said, the town and PG&E said that we would continue the dialogue on the potential for an underground utility district.
Okay, great.
Okay, so our second meeting actually was this afternoon. And so we got some additional information as to requirements that PG&E has to allow for undergrounding districts. The investigation that they've done thus far indicates that they don't anticipate having to raise the wires at Fair Oaks.
Those are pretty low though, but okay, if they say that.
That's what I heard today.
Okay.
They did, however, indicate that they will have to do some adjustment at both Maple and at Watkins, but they don't know how much yet in terms of height or how far in each direction they have to do that. So, but they told us that as they get that information, they will share it.
With the property owners as well as with the town.
They will start with the town.
Okay.
And we can certainly share that information as we get it.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there any known possibility that homes in the area while they're doing this work might lose power? They schedule as far as you know?
They may, we don't know yet.
Okay.
If they do, they usually provide a notification of a planned outage. It would be a planned outage. And so that would be something that they would typically notify the town as well as the affected residents that there's a planned outage on X date anticipated for however many hours, so that folks can plan around it.
Just one question. These are all wires that cross
Cross the
Yeah.
Cross the
cross the
tracks.
train.
There's 3 places that cross, Fair Oaks, Maple, or Maple then across, and then Watkins.
Okay. So following on that discussion, so we'll wait to hear back from them as to how much they think they're going to adjust. The things that we found out, and I'm going to say this, is that we have certain guidelines in the CPUC and PG&E rules as to where underground utility districts can be formed. There's regulations on how they are formed. We have some stuff in our municipal code regarding the public hearings and the process for that to happen. Basically, the primary areas that are focused are areas of high traffic, where safety is a concern if there's down power lines, that kind of thing, as well as in scenic corridors and civic areas. So the bounds by which that we would typically look, or that we would look for this area, is civic. For the area around the Civic Center, we have where we plan to build our new buildings down towards Fair Oaks. We have the park end towards Maple, and then there's a park right at Watkins. So
In the library.
yeah, so the park by Maple is on the side of the library, and so that I'll call it Civic Area 1, and then you have the
Park is civic.
the park,
Holbrook Palmer Park.
Holbrook Palmer Park. Now, the guidelines that they require is for any stretch has to be a minimum of 1 block or 600 feet. Okay, so Fair Oaks would qualify that from basically the cul-de-sac, which is on this side of the train tracks, which is right, I'm going to say almost in line with the property line for the Civic Center, over crossing the tracks. So that is less than 600 feet, but it's more than a block because it's going from that cul-de-sac to Station Lane. Okay. Watkins, I'm going to say Maple is not that short.
Okay.
I mean, sorry, Maple is much shorter.
Much shorter, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it gets thinner along there, yeah.
And depending on how we draw Watkins, it can be from station to the first cul-de-sac on the other side.
Okay.
The only way to really rope in Maple would be if we undergrounded Dinkelspiel Station, which would impact the residences that are on that street because they receive overhead utility service. So those properties would have to be converted.
Yeah. Would that be paid for by the PG&E funds, or the homeowner would have to pay for it?
There is an allowance by which we could use some of our credits to stub into the property.
Yeah.
And if the council elected, we may be able to partially subsidize the conversion, but the majority of the cost of that conversion will be picked up by the property owners.
Okay. And then do you know how much overall money that Atherton has built up in this fund?
We have approximately $1.5 million
Okay.
built up in our account. That includes a borrow forward of about 5 years. So the way that the regulations read is that you're allowed to you have a current allocation. You're allowed to borrow forward 5 years worth of incoming revenue into that account to do your district. We get about $25,000 a year, so not very much.
Yeah. And then how approximately how much length
Okay,
is
well,
1.5
let me say
million
this.
gonna
Okay,
buy?
so the costs have been escalating over the last several years. As you know, construction costs are going through the roof these days, and they're saying that most recently the costs are between $1,000 and $2,000 a foot for the PG&E piece. That doesn't count the other utilities. It is a lot. It doesn't, and it partially depends on complexity, how many circuits you're dealing with, transformers, all those fun things.
Should we wait for a recession and then the construction guys need the business?
So the other thing to be aware of is that there is a queue of cities that have already adopted districts. our adoption of a district will not jump us ahead of anybody else, so we would come in at the bottom.
Yeah, I know that
Okay.
Middlefield in North Fair Oaks, they're gonna underground their stuff on Middlefield. So.
Yeah. And PG&E, I think PG&E on their website has a list of
Yeah, I've seen.
already approved districts, and I think it's about 3 or 4 pages long of different districts that have been adopted. So the simple answer is that we cannot affect undergrounding to happen in a timeline that will prevent the raising of utilities. Okay.
Thank you.
That being said, we will be coming to council with an informational item, hopefully at the end of this month. I'm trying to work a few things out with PG&E to get some exhibits together in terms of what some potential districts might look like. And then council can take that information under advisement and decide whether or not they want to move forward with creating a district at this time, or considering whether they want to do one in the future.
Yeah.
There's a public hearing process that's involved. So if the council desired that we were to move forward, we want to outreach to everybody that would be affected and get input from them before that.
Okay. Thank you, Robert.
Okay?
That was the short version.
Oh, you got a longer one.
So we covered litigation update
The
already.
litigation we have covered, we're up to the Menlo Park grade separation decisions. And we,
Oh, sure. If you'd like, I can probably do it.
yeah, you can probably.
Sure.
bring us up to date on that.
So Menlo Park had a couple meetings the last 2 months, in April and May, on some grade separation decisions they want to make. They have some money that they got from the county to investigate doing some grade separations. Ravenswood had an accident, and it's always been a high traffic area, the Ravenswood Avenue, I should say, on the rail line. So they have to come to a decision on what is the preferred option, because they've been talking about this for a couple of years, and they can't actually apply for money until a preferred option. So they're trying to close that out by as soon as possible. So in April, they were asking for last-minute public comments, and the Felton Gables folks came out in force, and basically they said, we don't want grade separation all the way down to Encinal. It sounded like they preferred just Ravenswood as the only solution. So it was a pretty strong showing of force. About 80% of the speakers were from Felton Gables, and made that clear to the 2 council members that were there. So they took that feedback in April, and in May they put together a staff report about what are the possible preferred alternatives. So the 2 ones they're considering were Ravenswood only, and then the other one was 3 grade separations that included Ravenswood and the 2 streets adjacent to it in Menlo Park. The names slipped my mind, but those 2. Glenwood is one, and Oak Grove is the other one, correct. And the council members voted 3-1-1 to pursue just Ravenswood. So that is going to be the preferred option, but they will continue doing some research into tunnel trench or a viaduct. So either raised or lowered. And there's most of the people speaking there were Felton Gables again at this May meeting. But there are a group of people that are really pushing for a viaduct, including a few ex-council members. I assume they probably don't live near the tracks, but they really think it's best for their town. And then there's still a few people that want the tunnel trench, and they're supposed to send a letter to Atherton asking if we're willing to help participate in supporting a trench or tunnel. I think by our official. Well, at least from 2008, we were okay with it, but we'll see. They're supposed to send us, the town, a letter and asking about that. But have you guys received that, or?
The viaduct issue was raised 10 years ago when the bond measure just passed, and the preliminary design for the peninsula was a 4-track viaduct all the way down the center.
Yeah.
And the peninsula cities unanimously said no way. Please, let's not resurrect.
Well, I'm just saying this is a group of folks that are pretty adamant about it in Menlo Park. So I will say one of the council members, Councilmember Klein, was saying he actually used to live in the East Bay near elevated BART tracks, and he says it was terrible. So he's totally against doing any viaducts.
Well, after all his work on the PCC, I should hope he would be,
Yeah.
because that issue went up and down over years with that group.
So basically, the bottom line is the Menlo Park Council preferred option is going to be just Ravenswood grade separation only, and then as part of their safety continuing study, they're going to look at doing quiet zones all for the remaining 3 crossings that they have. So they're looking at putting in quad gates for those guys.
There was something, probably in the Post, that suggested that if it was just Ravenswood, they would actually close off the streets on Glenwood and Oak Grove, which seemed to me certifiably insane.
Well, there was an idea to close it off for car traffic and just leave it open for pedestrian and bike. I think you have a group of folks who are very pedestrian and bike friendly that kind of want that. But
They don't plan to ever drive down Ravenswood again, apparently.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found interesting about, because I followed this, thank you for the report, I followed it as well, and one of the things I always found from the pro-viaduct folks was that in their pamphlets promoting it, they always showed pictures of viaducts built in France, in Italy from 100 years ago, and I looked at that and said, they're absolutely beautiful, and if you want to build something like that here, I'm all for it, but good luck trying to get the money to build something that's that elegant.
And with wires on top.
Oh yeah.
Don't forget the wires.
Yeah, so I'm glad, I think the other advantage of the Ravenswood choice is that it leaves Menlo Park open to the possibility of getting funding from the San Mateo County Transit Authority, which has been handing out money to some of the agencies, government agencies that have had their act together and have submitted requests for funding.
Yeah, I think the biggest fear Menlo Park had was if they go too slow, Redwood City was going to surpass them, because Redwood City is about 6 months behind their study of doing their northernmost grade crossing. Whipple, yes. Yeah, Whipple. But even if they finish it, they are still behind Burlingame's grade crossing project. And right now, only San Mateo's 25th Avenue project has enough funding.
They're under construction.
Yeah, so they're the only ones who have enough funding for any money from the county. So Burlingame's looking for money from the county and the state, and then next would be Menlo Park if that were to happen. So.
High-speed rail is ostensibly putting money into the San Mateo. Whether that's actually true, I don't know.
Yeah. It's also, I just want to point out, it's interesting that I don't think the measure people are voting today, what is that, all around the Bay Area?
Region 3.
Measure 3, nor the sales tax they're going to put in, thinking of putting on the ballot in November. None of those have money dedicated to grade separation or to quad gates or quiet zones or anything.
We won't see any of that money in this area.
Well, not even us, but I don't think there's no money dedicated for anyone along the rail corridor to get from those sources of money. Yeah.
Like, all you have to do is look at how Dumbarton went, where it was defunded. It had 90 million, and then it was 96, and then they took the money away. There's absolutely, I'm editorializing, but based on the history of Regional Measure 1 and Regional Measure 2, which listed Mid-Peninsula, East-West projects. None of those got any funding, even though they're listed on the ballot measures as being projects that would be funded by the measure. So all of that money will go to San Jose, San Francisco first, San Jose a very close second, miscellaneous projects on BART, and we will see none of it. Dumbarton will not see a dime.
And amazing, it's going to go to undergrounding rail for San Jose and San Francisco.
That's right.
Yet there's no money to underground anywhere on the peninsula because it's too expensive.
It's amazing.
Did they give a reason for the abstention?
That was, I think, Carlton, but I forgot why she decided to abstain.
Interesting.
I have a question. On Alternative A, which is supposed to go under both the tracks and Alma Street,
Yes, yeah, Alma's gonna have to
its
be
own little
road
island.
separated, yes.
Right, so, is there gonna be a way to get from Ravenswood to Alma Street?
Uh,
No.
No.
you have to go,
You
you have to go around,
They'll go around.
yeah.
Alma
'Cause-
Street will be isolated.
Because I think if you did connect them, you'd probably have to condemn properties. There's a park on
Yeah.
one side, but there's like some businesses on the other. You'd
Yeah.
probably have to condemn
Yeah.
because there'd be no way to access them. Yeah.
Where does Alma Street come back to grade by the time it gets to Oak Grove?
It should be. I
Probably.
forget, but it should be by then. They would only have to grade separate. Only would have to road separate that one.
Yeah, actually, Alma Street could probably stay at grade, just like the
It'll
tracks
stay at
do.
grade. The
'Cause
track,
it's depressing
Yeah, we go
Ravenswood.
underneath.
yeah,
that.
Ravenswood will be
Yeah,
depressed,
right.
and that prevents any turns onto
Right.
Alma from either.
I mean, it's, yeah.
I just had one other thing about Palo Alto. They've decided on 10 grade separation options, and that's 10 over 4 crossings. They still kept the tunnel as an option, but nobody believes it'll get funded. But they are moving toward an end of the year decision on a preferred option too, because Santa Clara County actually has money to spend on doing grade separation. And it seems like they have money to do probably one per city that have rail. So Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and Palo Alto probably will get enough money for one. But if someone's too slow, another city could take a bigger chunk or whatever, and then you don't have any left. So after years of talking about it, Palo Alto has finally been convinced we have to have a preferred option. So they're actually gonna have one by the end of the year. So they're down to 10. They're gonna.
That'll be amazing if they
I know.
actually get there, because they've been talking about that for years, and it's gone up and down and around and around. And
Yeah.
they've done this project sensitivity solutions and all kinds of fancy garbage that has produced nothing.
Full of sound and fury. That's it.
Okay, the next item is the high-speed rails final business plan, which came out presumably on Friday. I have for you, I spent all day yesterday reading this silly business plan. I've got a short write-up of the things I think that are changed or relevant in that plan.
I do need.
The interesting thing is that they've added a great deal more work to the project at no additional cost.
Amazing.
They're talking,
They're being very efficient.
yeah, they're very efficient. They're talking about adding the Shafter to Bakersfield line, the Madeira to Merced, the Merced Y, all onto the initial operating segment. In addition to that, they are going to install infrastructure on all, so they can test their trains on the track instead of just having dirt mounds, which is what they have money for. Their travel times, they have modified a little bit. They're still not very close to Proposition 1A's requirements. They talk about adding a new service from Oakland to Los Angeles using conventional rail from Oakland to Merced and then transfer to high-speed rail. They're trying to funnel as many people as possible into this high-speed rail line. And when you get all through and look at the numbers they're quoting, it's more than they can handle with trains on one line. Where they will get those people still remains a mystery to me. They're discussing using the San Jose to Gilroy route using the Union Pacific corridor or right-of-way. One can read into some of their comments that they would use the Union Pacific tracks because they're talking about sharing among Caltrain, high-speed rail, and freight. Whether they will get Union Pacific to agree to that, I think is just highly unlikely, because those are active lines, not stub ends like the peninsula, which they finally capitulated on. But who knows? They do have several comments in there about eliminating grade crossing, and it has always been my understanding that high-speed rail had to be fully grade separated. But what that means in terms of their design, I don't know. One of the most interesting things I thought was the peer review committee report. They laid out 4 options that high-speed rail could follow. They could first stop work and abandon all completed work and pay the money back to the federal government on the recovery funds. Or a second option, they could complete the Central Valley work and attach it to conventional rail and forget about high-speed rail. And the third would be to add San Jose to Gilroy and LA to Anaheim, and then look for money to complete the Pacheco Pass tunnel or route. And finally, to modify phase 1 to work that is buildable and seek state approval, including funding, and abandon Proposition 1A. This is from the peer review group selected by High Speed Rail to endorse everything that they try to do. And I thought that was most telling. There's also considerable discussion about this early operator that they have brought on board, the German firm, that is supposed to give them operating experience on how they run the railroad and how they design it. They're now asking the early operator to give a review of the cost calculations as well as the design calculations on the road, which could attack some of our friend Susan's activities and uncover those if this is a competent firm that will work objectively. Whether that is so or not, we certainly don't know. But the whole business plan is just another wish list, another fairy tale about what we'd like to do if we had the money, and it makes very little sense. I don't suppose any of the rest of you have struggled through that plan yet.
You're quite right. Do we know what this early train operator, what firm it is?
It's a German firm. I've heard the name, and just offhand I don't remember it.
DB?
DB, yeah.
It's a DB? Okay.
And my most recent trip to Germany, the German press was very much down on the people that run their rail system. So I'm not sure they've got whether they've got competent help here or not.
Well, let me ask a question. Doesn't the current work only involve building road bed and track and not include electrification or rolling stock?
They have modified that.
Well, that's what they added in.
Yeah.
With no additional cost.
Well, yes, that's right. The contractors will certainly cooperate and do that. There can't be a problem.
Well, the reason I ask is because with the comments that Susan McAdams was making about the interference with high voltage utility lines, and no analysis, not addressing the issue at all, apparently.
And there's no
Just makes
mention
me,
of that.
right, just makes me think that, well, they don't really plan on building a high-speed train anyway with powered electrically, so there won't be any catenaries.
Well, in
nor
that
has to
case,
be.
there's no problem.
Right, so why worry about it?
Well, that's, it's all an interesting conjecture. They're certainly walking away from Proposition 1A on all the travel times, and they're making no effort to even pretend that they can do them. And of course, the requirement for having all the funding lined up money to get through Pacheco Pass, or even how much it will be.
Well, the walking away from the travel times has been a pretty successful strategy for them. I mean, it seems to me they have not been able to get any court to shut the whole thing down for 17 minutes.
Well, we haven't been able to do
Yeah.
that. We tried to play
Yeah.
that game, and we won it in the Superior Court, lost it on appeal. And there's been no effort, to my knowledge, to resurrect that suit.
Did we lose it because they haven't started spending that particular bond money yet? Because, or
They are spending money.
they are spending it?
Yes,
Okay.
they are.
Whatever happened on the discussions of putting another measure on the ballot? There was a former congressman who was pushing for that, and I guess
As
they
nearly as
didn't
I know, that just died.
really.
I haven't heard anything about it in some time.
Mhm.
Have you, Kathy?
No, I haven't. You know, we got burned once when we tried to do one and everybody sent their checks in and then poof, they didn't get enough voter signatures because they had to hire people who, you know, sit in front of Safeway and that would cost over $1 million to do. So we never made it and we started too late. And then there was something else that failed. It's terrible.
It seems to me it was also considered kind of a high-risk option, because if you tried it and lost, it was over forever.
Right.
All right, is that it for the business plan?
Are there more comments on the business plan?
I just want to give you, Paul, I don't think I have enough, but this is some of Elizabeth's comments to the board on financial things that are wrong with it. I just thought you might want.
Oh, I would love to see that, and I
Okay.
will read it, and then we'll.
It's just one pager and it's on the other side too.
Okay, thank you very much. No, that would be most
If
interesting.
I can have a copy, I can attach it to the minutes.
Yeah, that would be great. All right, we can now move into committee and staff member comments. Jim?
Nothing to add, thank you.
Scott?
I have nothing new.
Alex?
I'm good.
Narissa?
I have some information. It is not, next time I'll get you an updated version. But suffice it to say that all the end of last year and early parts of this year, the number one risk to electrification is what I was referring to earlier, the problem that was uncovered here. The number one risk to electrification is that Caltrain may not be able to operate the grade crossing warning devices at the road crossings. That is, they may not be able to come up with a system to control the safety gates. And they say that is their number one risk to electrification. Now,
Caltrain says that?
yes, and they do that in their monthly report on the Peninsula Corridor Electrification Program. Now, when they dropped CBOS was supposed to develop at some point a system that would control the gates when CBOS was dropped and an off-the-shelf package was purchased, that off-the-shelf package, it is described, has the potential to control the safety gates, but it does not work now, and it is not FRA approved. So this problem is very real. It continues, and as to Denver, as to the update of what happened with Denver reached its 2-year anniversary of operation for electrification this past April. And they still have the human flaggers. They However, what has occurred is the Colorado Public Utilities Commission has agreed to allow the Regional Transportation District of Denver to change their original standards to operate the safety gates. They will have to change the standards and rewrite the standards for the gate time, the time that will be down, because they simply could never get the system to work. And they had seen. So what happened was, initially, as you'll remember, the Colorado Public Utilities Commission refused to allow the Regional Transportation District of Denver to rewrite those standards. They said, you made them up, you designed the standards, you designed the systems. We think it could be very unsafe to have gates down for a very long time because people can try to drive around these lower gates. Some of the gates are down for as long as 3 minutes, and they are down for longer in most cases than had been planned. But what happened was the consortium of companies that worked on this system, part of which is the one that Caltrain is using, Balfour Beatty is a member of that. The consortium went to the Regional Transportation District of Denver and said, as you know, we provided private funding to develop this electrification. We've made a significant contribution of private funding. And if the PUC does not allow us to rewrite our standards so we can comply with federal regulations, then we are just going to withdraw. We're not going to operate the system anymore, and we're going to take out our money. So it was at that point that the PUC took a second look at changing the operational standards for the grade crossing warning devices. And they've said that they will allow them to be rewritten so that as they function, the functioning will become the design standards. And there's no other choice. And they're putting together a plan with the FRA to gradually withdraw the human flaggers. But that plan has not been worked out. And the Colorado Public Utilities Commission doesn't want any part in that. So the concern really does remain on some of these locations where gates are down for 3 minutes. What will happen? But that's the status.
Can I ask you a question? What exactly do the human flaggers do?
They literally, every time they're there 24/7. They live in those huts. And so what they do is they get out with flags and they make sure that cars and gates do not drive around.
That's it. That's their sole.
Yes, to avoid collisions.
Wow.
Yes.
Like a crossing guard.
Mhm.
Like a crossing guard.
It's a
Yeah.
crossing guard, and they're at every rail grade crossing, and have been for the 2 years of operation. Because initially, people were
How many
getting out of
crossings
their
do
cars.
they have?
There are 10 crossings involved in this.
Yeah,
So they could put in block gates. I mean, that's not going to solve the problem about the gates being down too long, but that would solve the problem of people going around the gates.
Well, I think the issue is that the gates, they can't operate the gates properly, so they're down
yes,
too long.
they never met the FRA
Right,
standards.
right.
The FRA standards said you have to, whatever standard, all they have to do
I understand.
was, whatever standards you designed and the PUC accepted, you have to meet those. And they could never meet them.
Yeah.
That was literally the problem. But what I anticipate here as more of a problem is whether or not we'll ever get a system to work here. That's of major import. So far, there really isn't technical design.
And you're talking about the constant warning time part.
Yes,
Yeah.
replacement.
Yeah.
Control
We're not even
gates.
talking about the CBOS replacement.
Oh, see,
Yeah,
right.
the CBOS is
CBOS
dead.
is done.
No, the replacement, the IE TMS or whatever.
So whether or not they'll be able to develop something is really an issue.
Because they're out of money, so I don't know.
But technically, they were never really able to do it.
Yeah.
Because, don't forget, the whole justification for electrification is to make the system more productive, to reduce the headway between trains, to have the
Right.
gates down for a minimal period of time. And now what's happened is the system that they've had to adopt in Denver de facto that was operating has increased the gate down time. And nobody has been able to figure out why they have been unable to get it to work. But the speculation is that when the grade crossings are close together in cities, that it's very difficult to determine whether a train is still it's counting it, double counting it as close to two grade crossings. And therefore gates are coming down and staying down for very, very long periods of time. That's the speculation. But nobody has been able to solve it. It's a very unsatisfying and very troubling situation, given the fact that Balfour Beatty is the same contractor for electrification that Caltrain has chosen. So I just wanted to update you on that.
Malcolm? Jack?
Just one observation, with all the publicity we've had and all the mailings we've got about this, today's election, I couldn't help but notice one of the flyers, and I don't remember what was being supported or who was being supported, but they had a bunch of signatures. One of the signatures was Jim Hartnett, and he gave his title as attorney.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, and I still think he's working as an attorney as well as running Caltrain.
Well, he makes so little money.
Yeah, they only get
He has 3 jobs he has over there that he has to do something to support himself.
Perhaps he can't use his job title, because then that might mean that the organization also was endorsing it. Maybe that's why. So he had to do it as a private individual.
As an attorney.
As an attorney, yeah.
Well, all of the
No.
council
So thank you
members
for-
that signed from
Thank you
various
for plowing
towns,
through the
they mentioned their organization.
business plan.
John, do you have any comments?
Well, if you'll humor me for 30 seconds for a Caltrain anecdote, since
Absolutely.
we graciously took the harsh language of Caltrain out. Those of you who know where I live know that across the street from my house, they have now constructed the Great Wall of Atherton.
Yes.
The new resident across the street has put up these 2 white things. He wants to plant trees behind the back fence. Not on his property, but well, I guess it's on his property, but he wants to put the trees between the fence and the tracks. So he asked Caltrain about that. And they said, well, they weren't sure they liked that. And he said, well, please send somebody out and take a look at it, and I'll explain and I'll show you just where it goes. It'll be fun. And they replied that they could send someone out, but that person would not be available until July of 2022.
Well, let's all hold our breath.
And I thought, that's such wonderful people. I said, why didn't they just tell you to go to hell? He said, I think they did.
Robert, do you have any comment?
It ain't happening.
Sherry?
Nope, thank you.
Oh. Okay, well, our next meeting, which is listed as a special meeting because it's on a different time, is the 14th of August, because we're having the same celebration in the park that we have every year on the first Tuesday.
Are we still meeting here, or?
Yeah, so, forgive me, Chair, I'm gonna interject. We have a new item on our agendas, which is part of the new committee policies, is to have something called future agenda items. It's an opportunity where members of the committee can suggest an item, and if the majority of the committee members vote in favor, not to to put it on a future agenda, not to discuss at the at present.
But don't we have to discuss whether it's worthy to put on the future
No,
agenda?
that's what it is. It's an
Okay.
opportunity for you to discuss whether you'd like it on the next agenda. Alternatively, there's other means of getting things on the agenda. And that's a colleague's memo or otherwise communicating with the chair to get things on. So if you have something that you would like to see, this is an opportunity for any of the committee members to make a suggestion and then have it voted on by the committee.
I don't think that this committee's had any issues getting things on. You work well the chair. There's other committees that have other issues, but I think that Paul's been pretty open about getting things. There's not much resistance from Paul.
Flow along with us.
He doesn't want to act like Caltrain or.
Will we get copies, Robert? Can we get copies of that trackable report?
We'll forward that out.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Oh, exactly 2 hours.
Mr. Chairman, I should alert you
Exactly 2 hours.
well in advance that I will be in Beijing on the 14th of August. So you will have to.
You're gonna call in, aren't you?
What?
You're gonna call in, of course.
Well, I could do that.
You know what
I know, it's a terrible time, I am told. I've never been to China. But I am told that August in Beijing is just awful. It's hot, it's humid, and it's full of pollution.
Air quality,
But I have no control over the timing of the International Heat Transfer Conference.
There's
Another hard copy of your comments.
Did you want a copy of this? Right there.
Has nothing to do with
Oops.
Yeah, take that.
I give you mine, but it's all.
The Great Wall of China.
written on.
No, across the street from you and
If you'd like, we can
2 or 3 houses.
have one
Tell you,
for
was it
you.
June 29th?
Under construction.
Is that not taking somebody else's?
How long has it been under construction? It seems to me it's been under construction for 4 or 5 years.
Well, if it's been quite that long, but it's been a long time.
I just wanna tell you.
But the guy that's building it,
Taking your high
I
school.
mean, he's sort of doing it himself with a couple of helpers. And he's always me.
Yeah, those are.
And I guess he was a
they were
construction guy. I mean, he seems to know how to do it because it doesn't look good.
Yeah, so the way that
But he
we've
gets
done
out there
it.
and works, 4 or 5
I
hours.
only see 1 or 2
Let me
people
ask, are they-
wherever I walk
The
by.
whole thing is being
Let me just show
designed
you
and
the
managed
thing.
by the owner.
It's a high-speed.
Who's.
Right. They should all be.
The town has a rule, I
Times are
think,
not all
that
exactly the
have
same.
to
They're,
They may have different
complete it
stops or
within
something.
such and such a
Well,
time.
they have
I don't think he meant
Lorena
that.
and,
But I don't know what, I mean, how do you enforce that if it doesn't do it?
Yeah, the rail. Right. So we go to the current, most recent, which is
In the
today.
last couple of days, he's
Yeah,
had
so
those
it should be a
tiles.
live
Yeah,
link.
tiles are up.
Right here is the Menlo Park staff report. So you click on that
That's the one I didn't see how that goes.
and it'll pull it up.
All right.
Okay?
Well,
Wow.
I'll let
No
you
worries.
know what it's like.
Well, please,
Take some pictures of
please
it.
do. I would be very anxious to hear about that.
So, okay, so
This-
what's,
That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that work.
happening is for the electrification project,
Okay.
the wires that are
Got it.
overhead and crossing the train tracks,
Civil engineering.
some of them need to be adjusted up higher,
Okay.
okay? And so at Watkins, which one are you?
Calculated the right-of-way cost based on cuts and.
Where's the walking?
Right.
This is Watkins right here. And here's the park, and here's, okay, so you're right here?
Yeah.
Okay, so, let me see if I can,
And we had a civil engineer that,
okay,
also from the UK, that was
So,
there along
yeah.
with the Caltrans engineers,
okay.
for the Renfrey engineers to see that they were doing their job right.
Right.
And we
So-
put the pieces together.
This is you right here,
All right.
right?
Oh, good.
Okay.
Yeah, we're gonna spend,
So, this pole
we've got a day in
right here,
Barcelona
let me go a
to
little bit. So they're
hang
saying that
around.
these
We've got
wires
one day
are too
we're taking
low,
a Gaudi tour.
and they need to,
the major
PG&E needs to
Gaudi
raise
parks
them.
there.
Okay, it's been suggested
Yes,
that we
yes.
should look at taking these wires
I've
and,
seen it from the outside,
putting them
I've never been
underground.
inside, so this will be my,
Well,
okay,
forward to
and
that.
so
they've done a lot
if
of
we
work
do
since I
that,
was there last.
there's a formal process
I think they
to
were
create what
expecting
we
to
call
finish
underground
sometime
utility
in the
district.
2020s.
right, I think that's right.
And so ultimately,
Yes,
these wires
yes,
that
there you
cross the
go.
tracks would be,
Unlike some of the great
Under the
cathedrals in
ground.
Europe that are taking.
what
them
that
out.
means though is, depending on where the boundaries are,
Yeah,
if this pole
yeah,
goes
there you
away,
go.
Uh-huh.
Well, you know,
and
that's a good full employment project, right?
Yeah.
It's, you know, high speed rail may come up.
utilities stop here.
Maybe that's what
The homes that
the
are
Cathedral
in
of St.
between
John
and get
Divine, I think it
service
is on the
Uh-huh.
will
west side
have to
of
take
Manhattan.
their
Yeah,
utilities from
Is
underground
actually
instead
not
of
finished.
Okay.
up
Is
top.
that right?
I always thought it was.
And
And when I
so
lived there, I
Your
went to Columbia
house
for grad school.
right now
And I found out
has
it's not finished,
overhead
that's not the
service.
original design is, and
This
they're
wire- these
talking
wires
about,
right
or
here.
maybe they've already
I
started.
think this is a
to
PG&E
finish it.
line.
One.
When I moved
Okay,
to Washington.
so if this pole goes away,
down to the Washington Cathedral, it
then
finished.
the
Really?
wire would have to
Okay.
come underground
They've
to your
since
house.
finished it.
Oh, all right, okay.
Okay, so
All right, well.
that's if we
yeah.
ask
Yeah, I'm looking
to
forward to it.
put that under.
Okay. So what's the benefit to under?
The benefit to under is not having the wires in front of the house.
I see.
The other concern that was raised, the reason why we have it on the agenda is because PG&E is looking at raising these higher.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
We don't know yet how high.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see. So,
Okay, so nothing's been decided.
mm-hmm,
We're waiting to find out how much higher those poles are planning to go.
mm-hmm.
And the so there will be a question as to whether or not the wires at Fair Oaks should be put down underground.
Mm-hmm.
The wires at wires over here at Watkins, if we do it, it would be, let's say, from Dinkelspiel Station to this cul-de-sac over here.
Okay.
So we don't know exactly what that would look like.
Mm-hmm.
And then to remove the wire from the crossing over here at Maple,
Mm-hmm.
we would actually have to do the whole stretch along Dinkelspiel Station.
Okay.
Okay.
So they may if they go under that wire, the one
It would have to come down.
go
and then,
under the ground.
yeah, and you change your meter to accept service from underground instead of overhead.
Okay. So it means they need to dig up my house, my property.
They, if that's the direction, then the answer to that would be yes.
So how do they protect my house foundation when got the impact?
They would work with you on how it's done. Again, this is, right now it's hypothetical.
Mm-hmm.
And if the council wants to continue the investigation, the first thing that we're gonna do is talk to all the people that are affected to
Mhm.
find out if the residents are interested in that.
I
And
see.
if the residents aren't interested, the likelihood is the council won't be interested either.
I see.
Okay?
Okay.
Okay?
So how when they possible happen?
We're gonna discuss the idea on June 20th with the council
I see.
as to whether they want us to look at it more. And
When you say looking more, it's being
to investigate
to see
if, to reach out to the community to see if the community is interested.
instinct to do the underground.
Yeah. So we would
So-
talk to the property owners.
So about the topic about say either go up or go underground.
Well, the going up is going to happen.
Okay. Go up
Okay.
and happen, but community consider to say go underground.
Yeah, so if the council wants staff to investigate the possibility of doing undergrounding
Mm-hmm.
and talk to the neighbors to see if they're interested in it,
Mm-hmm.
then we will hear that information on the 20th.
I see. Uh-huh.
Okay? You're welcome to attend the meeting on the 20th.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Okay?
Yeah, but I consider if we go under the ground, how do they protect my house?
Okay, so I don't know where your meter is. Can I turn the recorder off?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.